Hola, me llamo Marisa Gutierrez, and this is my language and culture contact presentation for the first uh, project. So for this project, what I did, I split it into 30-minute increments most of the time to make it a little bit easier and make sure I could absorb everything. So the first week, I watched an hour of television. I watched a cooking show, Cocinemos Juntos, and then I watched half an hour of Telemundo. For the second week, I watched half an hour of the My Spanish Lab videos and worked on the worksheets there. The other half, I worked on the podcast in Spanish. The third week, for an hour, I watched Tarzan in Spanish with English subtitles. And then the last week, I did some reading. So for the first thing that I did was I watched half an hour of a cooking show, Cocinemos Juntos, which translates to We Cook Together. And basically, to me, this felt like a Spanish version of Rachel Ray. A lot of things were very similar to the cooking shows that I watch in English. So the recipes they had were obviously a little bit different. We had sopa de camarón con chile pasilla, which is shrimp soup with chilies, which you can see at the bottom left there. They also did a biscuit con marmelade de fresa, which is a biscuit with strawberry marmalade. And then they did this last thing called pepetorias, which were they look like gift baskets to me. So some things that were similar was that there were like bright colors in the background. Everyone is very expressive. There was some playful banter about mantequilla, about making sure there's lots of butter in the recipe so that the biscuits are nice and flaky. Some things that were a little bit different, though, was it felt like she didn't talk to the camera as much as in an English cooking show. Usually they're talking to the viewer, but she would talk to her guests and she would talk to other people in the room. In the background, similar kind of like piano music with vocals or mariachi music. And something that I noticed that was interesting was that the guest would often teach her instead of her teaching the guest the recipe. So she was learning along with the viewer. And she was not afraid to be a little silly and joking around, which was very nice. As for the actual translation, what I learned was that I knew a lot of words that were food, like fresas or strawberries, agua, limones. She said some numbers that I recognized, like for cooking times and for measurements. So I don't know if I would be able to learn the recipes just from watching this, but I could get a good basis of what was going on. I learned some new words too, some things like listo, are we ready, or claro, of course, which of course we worked on in our textbook later. For the second half an hour, I watched the news in Spanish, and the things that they covered, again, were very similar to the things that other news shows like Fox cover. They talked about the bad winter weather, mal tiempo. They talked about bar fights. They talked about the same thing that I ended up seeing on Facebook about the Awatuki students who were wearing inappropriate shirts. They talked about trade conference. They talked about people going to get Cardinals haircuts for the game, which obviously this was a few weeks ago. Everything was very similar structure-wise to the English news. Everything was very dramatic. There were similar shots of landscapes and people milling about and such. They talked with the same kind of newscaster voice. They moved through the stories very fast, but they preview what's to come. When they actually talked to people, like someone out on the street, sometimes they were in English and sometimes they were people speaking in Spanish, which I thought was very interesting. Some other little things that I learned was poca nubosidad y frío, some clouds and cold when they talked about the weather, and el dólar hoy, today's dollar. Little note from what I watched from that hour of television on commercials, something that I found was interesting is that some commercials were in English, some were in Spanish, and some were Spanish, but randomly there would be a person who was talking in English within the commercial, which I thought was interesting. The voiceovers were always very enthusiastic and very fast-paced, and some of the commercials were pretty cheesy. Like there was a coloring book for adults, and I couldn't understand entirely. I think it was supposed to be a relaxing mechanism, but it just felt very interesting and very cheesy. So for the second week, I did half an hour of my Spanish Lab videos, which I'm sure other people did as well. Some cultural things felt very much like a life that I've been in. Like, the brother and sister would fight like siblings normally do. When they're driving, I need to use the bathroom, and the daughter would flirt with the bad boy mechanic, which is pretty stereotypical. Some translations that I learned was "Qué bien," how good, verdad, felicidades, and "Bajense" when they were getting out of the car. They said "get out." And then there was also the videos about people talking about using an interpreter and speaking to patients in Spanish. I thought it was interesting that there was a range of accents. Some people had a Hispanic accent, some people had a Southern accent, some people had no accent. But something that I really got from that video that I thought was very interesting and that I learned from was that someone said, try to do what you're comfortable with and try to talk to a Spanish patient what you know will come across appropriately, but if you're unsure at all, get an interpreter because you want to make sure that you're getting the right words across. And when you have that interpreter there, make sure that you're still talking to the patient and the interpreter is just the middleman, but you're not talking through the interpreter. You're not talking at the interpreter and then the interpreter's talking to the patient. So very good thing to keep in mind. For the second half, I watched some podcasts, podcastinspanish.org, Bea E. Reyes, and there were some that were free and had free translations, and so I watched listened to a couple of those, and then there were a couple that I listened to that did not have the translation, so I kind of had to decipher it for myself. So talked about very similar things that you'll hear on a daily basis. Do boys and girls read the same stories? One of the girls was asking, how should I color my house and each room in the house? And they even talked about doing feng shui. They talked about fun things to do in Spain, like going out to eat food, going to concerts. They talked about being superstitious, and it ended up, yes, that they are superstitious. And they talked about those exact same things that we would think of as superstitious. Cats, Friday the 13th, opening an umbrella in the house. They also talked about the Mediterranean diet and activities that children do after school, and they had someone else on for that. Some translations that I learned is "es muy interesante," very interesting. Pelota is ball. They talked a lot about what should she paint her house. They talked about colors, so blue, gray, white, orange, yellow, pink, red, turquoise, violet. When they were talking about food, they said conserva, which means to preserve. They talked about mercado, market, and then in the last one, activities that children do after school. Some days she said libre, I'm free. I don't have anything like swimming or any activity like that after school. For the third week, I decided to take some advice from my dialogue partner. He said, take something that you know and watch it, but in Spanish, because you already know all of the words, and so it's easier for you to make that connection between the English and Spanish versions. So I decided to watch Tarzan. Next time I will choose something where they do more speaking and not gorilla sounds, but it was a lot of fun. I actually watched it in Spanish, and then I had the English subtitles on, so if I was confused about something, I could just look there. As you see down there, though, it's with the Spanish subtitles. Didn't get as much out of this one as I did the other activities, but I still learned a few things. A lot of it was very literal translations, because there's that song, You'll Be in My Heart, and he sang En Mi Corazón. Something that I thought was pretty cute was when the Tantor, the elephant, is scared about going in the water, her mom says, "Está bien, ciela," which in English it said, "It's fine, honey," but when I looked up ciela, it was a term of endearment, and it said, "my heaven or sky," which I thought was pretty cute. All the sound effects were the same, and I wonder, because there's a whole song where it's just sound effects, if they used the same thing or if they recorded them again. And then the last thing was that they have the song Son of Man, which in Spanish is Hijo de Hombre, which I had stuck in my head for the entire week after that. And then the last week I did some reading. I had some resources. I went on the CDC and I looked up some fact sheets on different vaccinations, and then I went on to Choose My Plate because I'm going to be going into nutrition, and I decided to look up some fact sheets on choosemyplate.gov that were in Spanish. So on the hepatitis A fact sheet at the top, it says, lo que usted necesita saber, what you need to know. And I like to point out that in all of these fact sheets, they always use usted. They also talk about ingerir, which means ingested food, which is different because you always think of comer, eating. They also had a lot of different situational things. So menudo, meaning often, a veces, sometimes, for different people. Some people need to go get this, but some people don't. All people need to if you're under this certain condition. Something that I thought was pretty funny was I read this sentence, los hombres que tienen relaciones sexuales con hombres. And I was wondering, like, men, and then I saw sexuales, and so I decided to go look at the English version and literal translation, and on the English version it says men who have sex with men, and it was just quite literal, and I thought that was pretty interesting. In the English version it also said if you have serious allergic reaction, make sure you call 911. And in Spanish, it didn't have the number 911 on there. It said call a doctor or go to a doctor immediately. And then on the Choose My Plate fact sheets, lo confunden las calorías, confused by calories. And I also read a couple on fruits and dairy. On all of these sheets, they use the word consejos, which are advice or tips, so it'd be 10 consejos about dairy or something like that. Something that is very important for me to learn is un estilo de vida saludable, which is a healthy lifestyle, which is something that I say a lot in my practice. Something that I found interesting was that dairy products was translated into productos lácteos, even though there are dairy products that don't have lactose in it, so I thought that was interesting. And then in English, like on the English version, it said reduce fatty meats like ribs, sausage, bacon, hot dogs. In Spanish, it said reduce the fatty meats, and it said chorizo, bacon, and salchichas, which is sausage. And I like the fact that they included chorizo because it's specific to that culture. And then another word that is important for me to know for my profession is bocadillos, which are snacks. So some overall thoughts is there are a lot of cultural nuances, but there's also a lot of similarities. That, like with the cooking show, it felt very similar, and watching the My Spanish Lab videos, it seemed like a very stereotypic American family. And there are a lot of literal translations. Really not as scary as one might think to listen or watch something in Spanish, and for me it was very easy to get at least the general feel of what was going on the entire time. And I also kind of thought that similar methods could work for Spanish speakers if they were learning English, such as watching a news show in English, or watching a movie that they know very well in English with Spanish subtitles. So it seems like this is something that can go both ways, especially with the translations being so easy. And I had a lot of fun with it, and so I hope to learn more from my future ones. Thank you.